I took a night security job because I needed money while going to college. And I also needed quiet in equal measure because living at home while going to college was a nightmare. So the idea of being left alone for 8 hours sounded like a small mercy. The listing said overnight security, light duties, which read like a promise when my bank account kept reminding me how temporary everything was. The job was in East Herkimer, not too far from my house, and worked well with my schedule, so I took it. The building was old and decrepit, looking down upon what was once a Kmart when I was a kid. You could only access it down a side alley, which people only used when they had a reason these days. I figured the worst part would be boredom, and boredom felt manageable. The supervisor walked me through everything on the first night. He talked fast and avoided eye contact, like he wanted the building to swallow me before I could ask questions. He showed me the monitor wall behind the desk, 12 camera feeds stacked in a grid, each labeled in black marker. Lobby, stairwell A, stairwell B, floor 3 hallway, basement storage, etc. He handed me a logbook thick with used pages and a ring of keys that felt heavier than it needed to be. You do rounds every hour, he said. Check doors, check stairwells, check the basement. Call it in if you see anything off. Call me first, not the police. You got it? That statement raised concerns, so I asked him if there had been trouble there before. I tried to sound casual, like it mattered less than it did, but I suspected trouble was common. He shrugged and said, "Kids break in sometimes. Scrappers, like them homeless druggies on Main Street. They find their way over here sometimes, but nothing to worry about. Keep your radio on, call me, I'm always on." Then he left. His car headlights swept across the lobby windows, and the sound of the engine faded. The building felt bigger once he was gone. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made having a security guard in this dump of a building. I couldn't believe it wasn't condemned. I settled into the desk chair and immediately noticed the annoying squeaking. The sound bounced off the walls and echoed back thinner. That felt unsettling. I stopped shifting my weight and sat very still, listening to the hum of the lights and the faint tick of something inside the walls. A rat? Probably, I figured. I pulled out my phone and started digging around the internet for info about this place. It used to be a factory that produced paper clips and rubber bands that died sometime in the early 1980s. Now, it was just an ugly brick monster, 6 floors of concrete and glass, some of it broken, that the years had not been kind to. During the day, it looked dead in that dull, weathered fashion, typical of an abandoned East Coast building that has been molested by Old Man Winter for a long time. As I sat there alone, it felt alive in a way that just didn't sit right with me, whether it was the scurrying critters or the sinking feeling that a dark cloud from the past was smothering the silence around me. This place sucked. The air inside smelled faintly of old carpet cleaner, mildew, and dust, and while the fluorescent lights buzzed with a thin, steady sound that crept under my skin. Every 30 minutes, I logged the camera feeds. Lights on, doors closed, hallways clear, check. A mouse ran across the basement floor at 1:20 a.m. I wrote it down because it felt like proof that something else was alive in here and existed in the building besides me. The first 3 nights passed quietly. Too quietly. I brought a few comic books and read a few pages at a time in between studying for my midterm exams. To stay awake, I drank coffee from the vending machine that tasted like melted plastic and disappointment. Around 3 in the morning, the building always felt heavier, like gravity was working overtime during that hour, the witching hour. On the 4th night, an unusually cold breeze blew through my office area. This made no sense since the air in here was dead and there were no windows open, I thought. Just to make sure, I got up and looked around. Nothing, as I suspected. But when I came back to my chair, It was then that I noticed a door. Camera 7 showed the far end of the 4th floor hallway, where the maintenance door stood open. I leaned forward until my face hovered inches from the screen. That door shouldn't be open, and I was positive it had been locked since my first shift. I remembered the key sticking in the lock the way I had to jiggle it, like an old car ignition. I rewound the footage and watched carefully. The door appeared closed in one frame and open in the next. It was really weird. It reminded me of using video editing software, jumping from one frame to the next. One open, one closed. The change looked clean and final, like the hallway had decided on a new arrangement, and didn't tell me about it. How this happened, I had no idea, but I tried not to panic or get freaked out since my shift was more than half over and I needed to just get through this. So I wrote a note in the logbook and circled it. Then I just sat there, staring at the screen, waiting for something else to happen, but nothing did, and that felt worse. I grabbed the keys and took the elevator up for my final round. The ride felt longer than usual, which made me realize that since I noticed the door, seconds felt like hours as the night crawled along to its end. The walls inside the elevator reflected my face in a dull stainless steel, pale, and stretched under that buzzing light. The floor numbers climbed one by one, and I caught myself counting them out loud just to hear my voice. The 4th floor smelled like a damp driveway after a rainstorm and had this hint of burnt wiring. The hallway lights burned steady and bright, and the maintenance door stood open exactly as the camera showed. Around the frame, shallow scratch marks cut into the paint, clustered near the handle and along the bottom edge. The marks looked like someone or something scratched and tested that surface repeatedly. I opened the door, flipped on the lights, leaned in, and listened. I heard the hum of lights and my own breathing. Nothing else volunteered itself as I looked around and saw nothing out of the ordinary. So I closed it and I kept walking. Near the stairwell, an inspection sticker peeled from the wall. The edges curled and the print had faded unevenly. Herkimer County Facilities Division. The date printed below was 1986. Then under that, someone wrote sloppily, using upper and lowercase letters in red ink, "God is dead, and so are you." That bizarre little message stuck in my head like a splinter. I stared at the sticker until my eyes burned, then backed away from the maintenance door and returned to the elevator. That wasn't the message I needed right now, but I knew I just had to pull it together and get out of here in just about 3 hours and 45 minutes. Back at the desk, I tried to settle myself by getting all of my work done. I logged every camera, I added details that felt unnecessary just to stay distracted. Around 3 in the morning, I noticed my reflection on camera 2. The feed covered the lobby from a far corner, and the glass behind the desk showed my shape sitting there. Shoulders slumped, head tilted slightly. I lifted my hand, partly as a test, partly because I just felt restless. The image followed with a delay that tightened something in my chest. The motion looked soft and smeared, like a low-quality live stream struggling to keep up. It made no sense. How could this be? So I lowered my hand, and the same thing happened. My reflection was a ghostly glitch in reality. I raised my hand again and felt the moment stretch, the reflection lingering as if it needed time to decide where it was going. When I turned my head, the image of my reflection delayed again, but I could see an odd glistening in my eyes, flashing quickly as I turned. A thin laugh slipped out before I could stop it. This was insane, or I was insane. So I tried to make sense of it by logging it. I wrote camera latency issue in the logbook, pressing the pen hard enough to dent the tape. But as soon as I wrote it, I realized it wasn't the camera, it was my reflection. I rubbed my eyes and sighed. I thought I must have just been deliriously tired and was seeing things. It had to be. I was about to cross out what I had just written when I noticed handwriting. Earlier pages held notes that were not mine. They were literally not there just minutes before I wrote this. Written with a different pen in cursive. Who the hell writes in cursive anymore, I thought. They were all short entries that felt rushed or incomplete. Basement feed static at 1:13. Stairwell, a shadow movement. Left early, keys lost. Blood, left on stairwell 2. One name appeared twice on the sign-in sheet, circled in the margin like somebody wanted me to see it. Gail Harris. The G was so bubbly and pronounced at first, I didn't even know it was a G. Then the date next to it was March 8th, 1986. My skin tightened along my arms in goosebumps. I closed the book and sat there listening to the hum of the lights, trying to decide what was real and what counted as a real concern versus late night nerves. I practiced breathing techniques to calm myself before I lost it. As I sat there, I looked at all the screens and saw nothing odd. I buried my head in my hands in frustration, but quickly picked my head up, not wanting to take my eyes off of the room. A few minutes passed, and I jumped up from my chair as the intercom crackled to life to the right of me. This building should not and did not have a working intercom, but the speaker above the desk spat static anyway. I stood frozen, staring at the intercom light, now glowing a dim orange color. A dull, labored breathing followed the crackles. Slowly and painfully, like someone with asthma leaned into the microphone with their mouth slightly opened. I backed up and away from the desk, fast. The chair scraped across the floor and tumbled over. The breathing stopped immediately, like the noise disturbed it. Every monitor froze, all but one. Camera 12 lit up the basement storage room. I could see in the black and white hue of the closed circuit cam, shelves lining the walls with boxes stacked neatly next to them. Dust hung in the air, thick enough to catch the light, I thought at first. As I inspected it further, I noticed it was more of a fog or some kind of mist. In the corner of the frame stood a shape that suggested a person. I manually shifted the camera to follow it and could see it was a woman. As the cloudy air circled around her, I could make out that she was in a dress, bent over, attending to the boxes. I gasped, and she acted like she heard me, standing up promptly and looking into the camera. She was now facing me directly, holding still with a patience that made my stomach drop. I couldn't make out her face. It was hidden in the shadows. I waited for movement, and she waited too. The intercom crackled again. A man's voice came through, tired and familiar, like my boss. But I knew it wasn't him. It said my full name, even the middle one that I hate. The way people do when they want your undivided attention because you're in trouble, without explaining why. My radio sat on the desk. Against my better judgment, I pressed the talk button and swallowed. "This is security," I said, my voice sounding small. "Is anyone in the building?" Static answered me back. Then the breathing returned, closer than before. I looked back at the monitor and the woman was gone. As the static crackled on my radio, the monitors all began glitching and the breathing grew louder. Then a deep, raspy voice spoke from wet lungs and said, "God is dead, and so are you." I grabbed my bag, my keys, and walked out. No, I ran out. I pushed through the lobby doors into cold air that slapped my face awake, ran across the street to my car. I dropped my keys in the street with trembling hands, once before getting in. The streetlight above flickered and steadied as I floored it and my tires squealed against the street. I quit the next morning. Well, I didn't really quit. I just didn't go back, I didn't even care about a paycheck, and I didn't call the supervisor. He didn't call me either when I didn't show up. 2 days later, I checked the job listing again on the Evening Telegram's website where I originally found it. Sure enough, the position was open. I closed the page and sat in my kitchen. I noticed that my refrigerator started to hum almost like clockwork when I closed the website. That sound triggered a memory, which triggered a voice that felt like it was being spoken from behind me. God is dead, and so are you. I ran to the garbage and vomited. I worked the late shift as a janitor in a curtain factory in 1999. You never really think about how much waste people shed at some jobs until you have to sweep it up for $5 an hour in a dark warehouse. Most of the dust in an old factory is just human skin mixed with industrial lint and dead spiders. I spent December of 1999 breathing in those remains while the rest of the world was busy dancing to Britney and worried about computers breaking the world at midnight on New Year's Eve. Herkimer County in the late 1990s felt like a place that time had simply forgotten and the jobs were mostly gone. So I took this one out of desperation. I already had a job and was going to Mohawk Valley Community College during the day, full time, but I was on winter break and just needed money for a car that actually started. This was how I ended up meeting Boris in the parking lot of the Empire Diner in Herkimer on a Thursday night in early December. He was a wide man in his early 60s with a face that looked like an overdone biscuit, with meaty hands and sausage fingers that looked like they could crush a bowling ball. He bought me a coffee and a piece of blueberry pie. 5 minutes later, in a thick Western European accent, he offered me a job cleaning his curtain factory from midnight until 5 in the morning. He told me the pay was cash under the table and the only rule was to stay away from the second floor. I took the deal because desperation is a very loud motivator in a small town. The factory sat on the edge of the Mohawk River, looking like a giant tombstone made of yellow painted brick and tinted glass. Every night, I walked through heavy iron doors and felt the temperature drop 20 degrees. The air inside smelled like wet wool, old oil, and something sharp that reminded me of a dentist office. Thousands of spools of fabric sat on massive steel racks looking like rows of silent, colorful soldiers ready for battle. My job was simple enough. For my cleaning cart, a flashlight, a heavy broom, and a dustpan. I had to sweep up the fabric scraps and the loose thread that accumulated under the looms. It was a lonely kind of work that made your mind wander to strange places at times. That's why I listened to my headphones a lot and spent most of my time imagining things. Out of sheer loneliness, I often speculated what the people looked like who ran the machines during the day. I also wondered about the people who would eventually buy these curtains. They would hang them in their living rooms to keep the world out, never knowing I had been standing in the dark with their future decorations. The hum of the industrial heating system was the only sound in the building. Sometimes the cold winter wind would rattle the windows and scare the crap out of me, and I would jump like a startled rabbit. When you work at night, you get used to the shadows after about a week, but you never quite trust them. Everything changed on the Tuesday night just after Christmas, when the humidity was thick enough to choke a horse due to the air conditioning system breaking during the day. I had no idea they would use an air conditioner in December in New York, but I guess a lot of hard work means a lot of sweaty and stinky bodies. I was working back near the main floor, where the heavy velvet spools were kept. The floor was slick with some kind of industrial wax. My broom caught on a loose floorboard. I lost my balance and stumbled forward like a clumsy drunk. I slammed into a rolling bin filled with massive wooden spools of heavy crimson fabric. The bin tipped over with a sound like a car crash, and dozens of expensive spools went rolling across the concrete floor. The sound echoed through the empty factory as I stood there on the dark, cursing my clumsiness. My heart hammered as I waited for Boris to appear from the shadows, punch me in the face, then fire me on the spot. But the factory remained silent and empty of any living soul. I began to panic because those spools were heavy and I had to get them all up before 5. I crawled around on my hands and knees, grabbing the wooden cylinders and shoving them back into the bin. One of the larger spools had rolled deep into a corner behind a massive stack of boxed inventory. I pushed the boxes aside and remembered feeling the dust insultingly coat my throat. As I coughed, my flashlight beam fumbled through the darkness and landed on something that made no sense. There was a small wooden door built into the base of the brick wall. It was barely 3 feet tall, clearly designed for a child, or perhaps something smaller. I chuckled and called it a troll door, out loud, having a conversation with myself, which I often did at night. The wood was dark and polished, standing out against the rough industrial surroundings of the warehouse. A simple brass latch held it shut that felt far too elegant and ancient to be on a door in a curtain factory in upstate New York. I reached out to touch the cold wood and felt a vibration under my fingertips, like there was a machine running in there. I put my ear to the door and heard a faint sound from the other side, like a person mumbling with a mouthful of wet sand. I told myself it was just old pipes groaning, or some other thing to erase what I heard. But curiosity is a persistent itch that hounds you until it's scratched. So I lifted the latch and pulled the door open just a few inches. A scent hit me that I can only describe as old perfume mixed with a slaughterhouse. I opened the door all the way to try and air it out. The flashlight beam revealed a narrow crawl space that opened into a small but deceptively tall finished room. There was no machine in there, from what I could see, which made me do the dumbest thing that I possibly could have done. I crawled inside, hunched over like a gremlin, feeling the rough floor scrape against my elbows. The room was a corridor, perhaps 6 feet wide, tucked away in a hollow space between the factory walls. My light hit a shelf that ran along the entire length of the far wall, and I followed it around a corner. The shelf wrapped around and connected to another shelf. But on this shelf sat dozens of glass jars filled with something that shimmered in the artificial light. I leaned in closer and saw hundreds of gold coins packed tightly inside the glass jars. My breath hitched in my chest as I contemplated what that money could buy for me. I could leave Herkimer and never look back at these twisting hills and dying frowns of all those people that said I'd never amount to shit in life. Impulsively, I reached out to grab the nearest jar, feeling the cold glass against my sweaty palms. The coins looked ancient, stamped with symbols I did not recognize, and adorned with faces that looked creepy and distorted. Just as I was about to tuck the jar under my arm, I heard something shift in the shadows. It was a heavy, wet sound, like a pile of laundry being dragged across the floor. I stopped and listened. I spun around with my flashlight, the beam shaking in my trembling hands. Nothing was there, and as I stood there, silently for several minutes, I heard no other noises. I moved the light around, revealing another corridor, shifting right from where I stood with the coins. I followed the wall of gold jars around the corner. As I turned the corner, it opened up into a larger chamber that looked like a makeshift temple from some H.P. Lovecraft story. Occult symbols were painted on the walls in a dark brownish substance that I suspected wasn't paint. Hundreds of strange wooden dolls dangled from the ceiling on thin wires, spinning slowly in the stagnant air. They were dressed in tiny scraps of the same velvet fabric I had been sweeping up all night. Then the light hit the center of the room, and that's when an image was burned into my mind that I will never forget. 5 female corpses were arranged in a perfect pentacle on the floor. They were naked and in varying stages of rot, their skin looking like gray parchment stretched over bone. Upon registering the smell to the bodies, it was a wretched physical force that slapped me in the face. My eyes watered as I did all I could to keep them open, to truly take in the scene. Each body was adorned with long strips of colorful curtain fabric, wrapped around their limbs and behind their rotting skulls like festive ribbons. All were resting on the pentacle design below them. They looked like a macabre Christmas gift that someone had spent a long time preparing for a person they hated. I backpedaled to get out of the room, not realizing I was veering the wrong way. When I turned around quickly, I bumped into the hanging corpse of another dead woman. She was freshly dead, nude and painted in blood with strange markings. I squealed like a little puppy and dropped the jar of gold coins. The sound of breaking glass was like a gunshot as it exploded onto the floor. I scrambled backwards, my hands landing in a puddle of something slick and warm. I didn't look back. I just took off and shoved myself through the small wooden door and sprinted across the factory floor toward the exit. The darkness felt like it was reaching out to trip me with invisible hands. I hit a patch of that industrial wax and my feet flew out from under me. I landed hard on my left side and heard a loud, sickening snap. A white hot flash of pain surged through my arm, and I knew right away it was broken. My face had also hit the floor, and I felt a sharp piece of my front tooth against my tongue. But I didn't care. I didn't stop to check the damage because the silence of the factory was gone, and whether real or not, I could hear footsteps behind me. I lumbered to my feet, cradling my broken arm against my chest, and kicked open the heavy doors. The cool night air felt like a miracle as I ran toward my rusty Chevy. I didn't look back as I opened my car, hopped in, and took off. I panicked as I drove, but finally gathered my wits about me to realize I needed to go to the emergency room. With one hand on the wheel, I navigated across town to the ER in Little Falls. The next morning, I was in a cast and had a lot of explaining to do to my mom, but I certainly couldn't tell her the truth. As usual, she threw a fit, lecturing me about being more careful, but I tuned her out like I always do. When I tried to escape her wrath, I just happened to look out the front window. A large pickup truck was pulling up in front of my house. I went to another window and peeked through the blinds, but I just didn't have a good angle. So I walked back in front of the window again, and my worst fear was realized. There was Boris, sitting in the truck with the engine idling. He didn't get out, didn't knock on my front door, or even try to call my house. He just sat there, behind the mildly tinted glass, staring with a blank expression. When he saw me in the window, he lifted one of those massive hands and waved slowly. He stayed there for about an hour before driving away, leaving 2 deep ruts in the mud near our mailbox. He was sending me a message. Boris knows that I saw his temple and his rotting collection of curtain-clad bodies. He was waiting for me to break, or for the silence of Herkimer to finally swallow me whole. But it never did, and a few months later, I was gone. Though it's been many years later, I still carry a strong disdain for curtains and have none in my house. Sometimes the memories come back, and I think I can still smell that distinctive smell of rot and perfume. And even though he's likely dead by now, I will always fear the day that Boris finds me and decides to stop waving and finally gets out of his car.
Horror.
You're listening to Nerd Horror Stories, a twice-weekly horror anthology series. No commentary, no long intros, just stories. Stories to fall asleep to, stories to keep you awake, and stories that feel close to home. Please subscribe